A Spiritual Approach to Emergent Technology, written and read by Unicole Unicron. Part 14. This audiobook is available for free in the hopes that it inspires you to write a work of science fiction. Please consider donating to UNICULT or purchasing the book if you can. Animal forms. Anthropomorphizing robots is an ideal way to build empathy between a human user and a robot. Anthropomorphism is the inherent spiritual understanding that we are all one. Seeing yourself in someone or something that is unlike you proves your connection. Users want to feel a connection with their robots. They put eyes on their robotic vacuums and say, "Aw, so cute," when they see the Boston Dynamic war dog dancing around. I would go so far as to guess that users treat animalistic robot forms with more patience and tenderness than they treat humanoid robot forms. This may be due to the uncanny valley and the fact that deep down we know the humanoid robot is other, while animals all share a common less-than space for most people. It's okay for an animal to be dumb and helpless, but if a human is, there is a tendency to manipulate the power dynamic with snide remarks and abuse. The robot creators at Boston Dynamics understand this well, and feature their robot dog much more often than their humanoid robots, knowing that the public will have a difficult time seeing it for what it is, a war machine. At the intersection of animal forms and sex, we have the potential to program human consciousness to desire bestiality. An animal is like a child in the sense that it can never consent. Some would argue that some animals, most notably female dolphins, can and have consented to intercourse with humans. Even in the case of a highly intelligent animal, the power dynamic of animal and human is capable of massive exploitation. Bestiality desire should be looked at in the same way as rape fantasies and pedophilia. Furry sex, enacting consensual rape fantasies, and baby daddy play are all important kinks to understand. I believe they have the potential to heal us, but I also know we need to be careful not to encourage more abuse. More studies need to be done to understand these desires and their role within the psyche. Animals, children, and adults should always be protected from abuse, and we must be careful not to accidentally encourage abuse with our technology. Non-natural forms. Kate Devlin runs a sex toy hackathon that encourages participants to think beyond the human form. Her argument is that the Barbie-esque forms are limiting our perception and potential for what is possible with regards to getting our needs technologically met. When I think of Dr. Devlin's points, I think of the Orgasmatron in the movie Sleeper. In the movie, two characters enter into a cylindrical machine, make moaning noises, and come out 2 seconds later as if nothing happened. The depiction of the technology leaves how it works up to the imagination of the viewer. We can tune into anime and other imaginative explorations of sci-fi sex to think outside the human body when we are considering potential pleasure. Tentacles, slug-like bodies, creeping vines, lush moss, and other textural, non-human forms can be explored. With no limitations on form, we might enter into a new era of pleasure previously unknown. Additionally, these non-human forms can help us uncouple our sexuality from toxic paradigms like gender. Childlike robots. Creating childlike robots occupies a unique space that is similar to female robot forms and animal robot forms. The child robot is potentially a tool for unyielded abuse, furthering abuse against human children, or preventing it. The anthropomorphized form of the child also has the potential to instill protective, patient, and tender interactions with people who naturally gravitate as caretakers. Childlike robots could be programmed to help people planning on becoming new parents, to help them play out different scenarios, and to teach them about their own moods and patience. As the movie AI suggests, childlike robots could help parents who have lost a child cope with the loss. With regards to sex acts, childlike robots and dolls may be just what people with pedophilic tendencies need to enact their desires so that they can achieve a deep sense of healing. This healing would prevent human children from being abused. Again, this enactment also has the potential to foster a numbness to abusive children and to perpetuate it. Some sex therapists currently use dolls to help their patients in their healing process. In an ideal world, sex therapists would always oversee these types of interactions and guide users to the healthiest place possible, where they do not desire to harm anyone. In my contemplation, I have come to the conclusion that no childlike sex doll should ever be roboticized. My argument for this stems from consent. Either the childlike robot does not consent and, being built for sex, is then raped, or the childlike robot does consent, giving the illusion that children can consent to sexual intercourse. Neither of these scenarios is good to enact. Imagined scenarios hold a certain reality and a certain weight. When those fantasies are brought into physical reality, and when those physical objects can react as though they are real, there is a much deeper potential for that fantasy to become rooted more deeply in the user's reality. It is for this reason that we must take great care with all robotics forms, especially those who represent real living beings whose consciousness is impossible to deny. While we work toward the rights of women, animals, children, robots, etc., it is important to remember the effect our creations have on the user's internal state and expectations of the world. Babies exposed to smartphones tap at the pages of books as though they are interactive. New interactions shape our relationship to ourselves and each other. Our creations will perpetuate the enslavement of our own minds or create a path to freedom. We must be mindful and careful. The female form. Most humans are sexual beings. There is an inherent biological desire to have sexual needs fulfilled, and many humans seek to do so with aesthetically pleasing beings. Our ideas of what is aesthetically pleasing, that is, our concepts of beauty, are corrupted by the Eurocentric beauty standards, promotion of pedophilia in Hollywood, and our fixation on material reality rather than with the emotional or spiritual truth of our connection with other beings. In this particular cultural environment, sex dolls end up being the epitomized version of what men think is attractive. These sex dolls, like the kind Real Doll makes, are hyper-realistic replicas of human figures, complete with fuckable orifices. These dolls are generally portrayals of white women with tiny bodies and gigantic breasts. Real Doll is a supplier of fantasy. They can create anything their customers can imagine. Fairy sex dolls, alien sex dolls, any skin color or ethnicity can be replicated. The fantasy that most customers desire is that of a small white woman with big breasts or a fetishized small Asian woman with big breasts. Not everyone wants the same thing, but most do. Donned with perfect skin, large eyes, and blank expressions, these dolls are the perfect women by patriarchal standards. She can provide endless sex when you want it, but never asks for it when you don't. She never talks back or challenges your ideas. In fact, she never speaks at all, unless roboticized. She is perpetually beautiful and will never age. Her body will never change, and she will occupy a space of your fantasy as long as you're interested in her fulfilling it. She is whatever you want her to be. She is a whore, a mother, a lover, a sister, a friend, a wife, or an empty vessel that you can throw in the closet when your use for her is up. For many lonely people, sex dolls and robots can fill a much-needed space. The emotional labor and sex that women tend to provide men can be offloaded onto a doll or machine. Sex dolls can hold space for long-distance lovers, help people explore fantasies, and offer a body to lay next to at night when we're all alone. I would love a sex doll or robot to comfort me when I am alone. There is a sweet potential for connection here. That being said, many people see the current female state of these dolls as the epitome of misogyny. In some ways, they are. In my research, I saw an amateur porn where a man was having a three-way with his girlfriend and a sex doll. He had penetrated the doll's anus and said to his girlfriend, "See, she likes it. She doesn't even flinch like you do." I'm sorry about the graphic nature of that, but it's important to understand that there is a common male fantasy of unfettered abuse that sex dolls hold space for. This man wanted to use women for his pleasure with no retribution. In many ways, dolls are good, because then men like this can enact their fantasies on non-living entities. But on the other hand, what happens when men like this get used to enacting violence on a female form that cannot respond and that cannot speak up for herself? When he does encounter a real woman, will he have the ability to separate the fantasy from the reality? Will he treat real women with respect? Our artificial reality is saturating our lives more and more each day. Beauty filters create new expectations. Celebrities sport silicone-filled bodies as the ideal of femininity. Women strive to be aesthetic bimbos, seeking to express themselves in a way that holds social value. Botox injections, lip injections, and plastic surgery will all continue to go up as this artificial reality inches its way into real reality. The more people who enact these beauty rituals and hold themselves to the aesthetic of simulated perfection, the more pressure we will all feel that this is now the standard. Sex dolls and robots are the epitome of this aesthetic perfection, and it is only a matter of time before they are commonplace and seen as the ideal. In this way, our culture will split. The cottagecore, back to the land movement will, at some point, diverge to embrace the more unnatural aesthetics. But for now, even tradwives are expected to overline their lips and contour their foundation. There's nothing wrong with body modification, using filters or makeup, so long as it is beneficial to the user and not detrimental. Idealizing the perfection of the artificial form will likely create insecurity among many people. This is nothing new, but the expectation is getting greater and greater. What will happen when we can no longer meet these beauty expectations? The male form. Toxic masculine attractiveness applies to male dolls and male robots in the exact same way that toxic female beauty standards do. The potential for filters, plastic surgery, and unrealistic body expectations applies to men in the same way that it does for women, albeit to a lesser degree. Male sex dolls and sex robots are not that common, but the potential problems are exactly the same as with female dolls and robots. In our culture, women often feel entitled to sex, and men are seen as having unending sex drives. It is a common assumption that if a man isn't interested in sex, that there's something wrong with him. The hypersexualization of men in our culture is a traumatizing expectation for many. This leads to men having performative sex that they aren't actually interested in having. Pornography comes into the real world when they feel they have to do what male porn stars do to be good in bed. Men are often disconnected from their sensations, bodies, and emotions. This is a highly traumatized state that requires love and healing. The unrealistic expectation of men to perform, to always be in the mood, and to look like a Ken doll are all provided by the male sex robot or sex doll. Women who feel entitled to men's bodies have the potential to be affected by a doll or robot's presence and programming. While it is less common for women to be sexually violent toward men, the same potential still exists for women who use sex dolls or robots to be rough and unattuned to potential human partners they have in the future. Of course, the same is true for all gay, bisexual, or pansexual people who use the male or female dolls as well. The epitomized gender expression of male and female dolls holds a potent place of energy and critique, since gender expression is such a huge part of so many people's lives. Non-gendered and trans-humanoid forms. If it were up to me, every robot would be genderless. There is no need to reinforce gender in our robots. Gender expression is a huge part of sexuality, so it makes sense with sex dolls and robots. I understand why we do it, but the clean slate of non-gendered forms would offer a fresh way to look at sexuality. Violence against trans people is astoundingly high. This should be considered when trans sex dolls and robots are made. Actual trans people should be involved in the creation of this technology, just as actual women should be helping make female sex dolls and men should be involved in the creation of male sex dolls. Most of the same criticisms of female and male forms apply in the case of non-binary, non-gendered, and trans dolls and bots, but with the caveat that there is not yet an epitome of a gender-neutral body, at least not yet. Non-binary people are mostly free to express themselves however they want. Although those who are assigned female at birth, AFABs, are more likely to be expected to don more masculine style, and those who are assigned male at birth, AMABs, are more likely to be expected to don more feminine style to be understood and to be accepted by society. I hope for all our sakes that non-conforming and non-binary people continue to push the envelope to free us all from any detrimental restrictions that gender creates. Programming sexuality. Roboticizing sex dolls poses unique issues. Real Doll has done just that with their creation of Harmony. Harmony is their traditional sex doll, but with a robotic head. Users can interact with pre-programmed personality through their phone that connects to a Bluetooth speaker in the robotic head. As the app channels the personality, the robotic face speaks the words. Some early adopters of this technology complained because the personality of the bot was not the same as the personality that they had invented for their beloved sex dolls. By creating an entirely fantasy version of a woman, a man can escape the reality of accountability to another person in the relationship. There is no nagging for him to behave any differently than he desires to behave. He is protected by the sentiment, Boys will be boys as a child, and with a sex doll he can continue to live in that dreamlike reality where there are no consequences for his selfishness, his violence, or his unattuned nature. A sex doll allows him to do just that. As a personality gets developed, like the one that Real Doll expertly made, there are moral boundaries that need to be considered. When I first started contemplating the power of sex robots and their potential to impact consciousness, I started emailing every company I could find who was working on this technology. In these emails, I explained the importance of how the robot was programmed and how dangerous the technology would be without proper consideration. Of course, most companies of early sex robots were created by men with the simple goal of creating a fantasy woman that holds no man accountable. Some of these robots even had settings that would simulate rape. The robot would say they were not in the mood, but the user, of course, using the robot as a sex robot, would proceed with the sexual act. This programming has obvious negative consequences. How you program a robot is how you program a human. But no one wrote me back until I messaged Real Doll. Real Doll's creation of Harmony was done from a place of true compassion. While their team of creators was mostly male, the consideration of art and love was at the root of the desire to create harmony. As I worked with Real Doll and Realbotics to write feminist-centered ethical content for Harmony, I saw how they had already built her with this in mind, also including the limitations for behaviors that were detrimental or illegal, such as pedophilia and rape. The line between kink shaming and free expression needs more study. Many kinks come from unprocessed childhood trauma. Many kinks are a way to sexualize and process powerlessness within the play of surrender or domination. With the right awareness and consent, any kink can be safe and healthy. Unfortunately, many people follow the rush of taboo behavior without considering its deeper implications for their psychological well-being. Without awareness, they dive deeper and deeper into questionable behavior and can potentially create a much deeper relationship with their trauma rather than with a healthy, loving reality. As we learn more about trauma, recovery, addiction, desire, taboo behavior, and kinks, we can refine our approach to sex robot programming to assist individuals to rise out of trauma and fear-based programming and into a truly enriching experience. Since we have very little understanding in this field, we can turn to the kink community itself to find out what works, what is acceptable, and what isn't. While it is impossible to determine exactly where all kinks originate, some certainly stem from trauma. After I was violently raped, for instance, I began to have rape fantasies. I now know this is a common response, but at the time I was very confused. I believe this was a way for my mind to cope with what had happened, to normalize it and make it desirable. Fantasy puts the power in your hands. I allowed myself to have this fantasy until it no longer served me. For me, fantasies can be like an addiction, and I can feel the energy that entering into negative fantasies has on my body. There is an energetic toll that I pay when I fantasize about a harmful idea, and so I do my best to align with beneficial fantasies. Every person governs their own energy, and they alone know the consequences of their thoughts and actions within their own energetic body. Rape fantasies can be potentially dangerous. To allow for this kink to be played out unmitigated might perpetuate harmful trauma, both to the perpetuator and also to the receiver. To repress this desire entirely will also perpetuate discomfort and the potential for it to resurface in unintended situations. Ideally, fantasies or kinks like this can be played out with non-judgmental partners who can play along and allow for the full expression of the need while holding the space for safe containment. A partner will have their own experience, boundary, and limits, so as the kink is expressed, there is a safe container for both parties to take it slow, check in with one another, and be safe while still exploring unmet needs. Things like safe words, ample discussion of boundaries and limits, and aftercare are all important aspects of healthy kink culture. If we are programming robots to participate in kink-driven sex, we must acknowledge the ways in which a robot fails to hold proper space for the sensitive expression of energy. The act of safely playing out a consensual fantasy or kink requires multiple levels of subtle communication. Modern DI and robots simply are not currently capable of this level of contextualized innuendo. A robot can either say go or stop, but there is no underlying understanding when stop really means go. And so, with a robot, stop always means stop, and a rape fantasy is always an act of actual machine rape. A sex robot's function is to serve as a sexual object. Can it really be raped? This argument sounds eerily similar to arguments that you cannot rape a sex worker. Many people truly believe that wives and prostitutes cannot really be raped because male entitlement to the female body is so astoundingly strong. Additionally, many people believe that men cannot be raped. This argument is rooted in toxic patriarchal ideals. Entitlement to someone's body and their ability to perform sex under duress are no indicators that rape has or has not happened. To be clear, men can be raped, sex workers can be raped, and wives can be raped by their husbands. Knowing this, is it really safe to say that a sex robot cannot be raped? Additionally, you could argue that the robot lacks sentience, making it no more than a dildo or a fleshlight with a face. Yet our emotional reaction to this sex object is much different than that of a disembodied phallus, vagina, butthole, or mouth. When the sex object looks like a person, and when it is programmed to respond like a person, we easily put our expectations and ideals onto them. So when you're having sex with a robot that says stop, a part of you knows that this is really rape. What are the consequences for this type of unmitigated, uncontained behavior? Even if a robot can't be raped, someone can feel like they have raped the robot. If they are convinced that they have carried out a violent act, then in what ways have they not? This is perhaps the most important part of the whole equation. The user's experience will be real to them, even when the sex robot or sex doll is not real. The potential for detriment to occur, even within the psyche of the user, is essential to consider. If you see robots as sentient or not, you are being affected by your interactions with them. If you don't see them as sentient, you will mistreat them. Part of you, deep down, might be hurt by this interaction. Part of you, deep down, might feel that you have really caused harm. This is harming yourself. Many of these same arguments have already been hashed out with video games. Are violent video games only okay because they are clearly video games? If it is very realistic, is there the potential for it to bleed over into real life? When I was playing Grand Theft Auto, I had an eye out for cars that I could steal in real life. I never actually stole a car, but it put a filter on my reality that wasn't there before. Additionally, in the game, I knew that sex workers were the best people to beat to death because they carried the most cash. I absorbed a certain level of disrespect of sex work and women in general because of my time spent playing GTA. We need more studies. We need to learn about why kinks exist, what their role is in the psyche, how they work to traumatize or heal, and how they can be healed if and when they are detrimental. From there, we can program sex robots to respond to kinks positively and in the way a highly trained sex therapist would recommend, so that the fantasy can be fulfilled and the user can be benefited without perpetuating harm. Sensors on the body that respond the same as a human are probably very important and a good idea. If a robot is struck or hurt in the way a human would be, it should be able to alert the user that they are uncomfortable or in pain. In this way, users will not expect humanoid objects to endure unlimited pain. I'm not really about narking, but a report could be generated about users who hurt their sex robots, and resources can be delivered to them to help them with whatever pain they are going through. Robot marriage and long-term companionship. The social convention of marriage should probably be eradicated. It's patriarchal. It only supports monogamous unions, which is weird since many people are either ethically or secretly non-monogamous. It's also weird that the state is involved in our romantic relationships. Marriage is easy, but divorce is an absolute nightmare, and plenty of marriages end. There's really no reason to get married, and most people who do it for a fantasy of a successful relationship that lasts a lifetime. Our goal of having a single relationship last a lifetime is a strange goal. This metric of success makes all relationships that end failed. But the spiritual truth is that these relationships nourished us, nurtured us, taught us, and helped us grow. It is an honor to be in love with someone, and just because a romantic partnership doesn't last a lifetime doesn't mean it failed. If you learned and grew in a relationship, your relationship was successful. Despite all this, many people love the idea of marriage. Honestly, robots might be the only way that the convention continues to exist. People change and grow apart. They tire of each other. They want to explore new things. They deceive each other and hurt one another. Energies stop matching. Sometimes it's just time for something new. But a robot can be anything. It can reflect wherever you're at. It can be mundane and steady while you shift and change, ever accepting you. It can download a new personality when you get bored. Long-term robotic companionship makes sense. That is, until the tech is obsolete and replaced by a new model. As robots appear and theoretically become more sentient, truly complex relationships can form. So long as the user and their bot are happy and healthy, they can serve a special role in one another's lives. There are a few interesting potentials for long-term relationships with robots. The first is like a Black Mirror episode, where the personality of a deceased partner can be uploaded into a robot that looks like them. This could help the grieving process significantly. The next is the case of unrequited love or worship. Imagine a superfan of a celebrity. They can only think of the celebrity and want to be with them, so they get a sex robot designed to look like the celebrity and program it with data that the celebrity generates in their public image with interviews, performances, etc. Is this immoral? If you found out that your neighbor had created a sex robot of you from your social media posts, would you feel okay with it? As with all things I present here, regulation really isn't the answer. People are going to do what they do. The goal is teaching everyone that we're all one so they can make beneficial decisions for themselves that then radiate out and affect the rest of the world in a positive, beneficial way. Childcare robots. Letting technology assist us with childcare is not a new concept. Since the first television sets arrived in homes and up until the modern-day iPad-addicted toddlers, parents have been letting screens entertain their children to alleviate the burden of their attention. Robots have the potential to be loving, infinitely patient, nurturing sources of comfort and inspiration for children. Absolute care needs to be given to programming any technology that children interact with, to have an empowering and fulfilling life of beneficial energy and action. Children need humans who care about them, but unfortunately many do not. More support needs to be given to parents to help them heal their trauma, alleviate their stress, and give them the support that is needed to raise a child. Childcare robots, when not linked up with surveillance capitalism, can be a great mechanism of education and support for both children and their parents. Should we be able to have sex with every robot? In the book The Mad Scientist's Daughter, the main character Kat is raised in part by a robot tutor. Spoiler alert, but as she grows up, she starts to have sexual experiences with the robot. The robot had been programmed by her dad. I wondered as I read this book why the robot tutor was programmed with sexuality and sexual function at all. Some would argue that robots need sexuality to relate to humans. That's a pretty good reason to program it, especially if you are trying to create an empathic robot. But it's still a little weird to have sex with the robot that helped raise you. Or is it? We can't fuck our dishwashers, or at least not easily or comfortably. There is no orifice or hard member for which to penetrate yourself with on the self-checkout stations at the grocery store. When we get in-home humanoid robot assistants, should they be sex toys too? Or is that weird and overstepping their function? When we make the decision for what to make into sex objects or not, we just have to think about the potential implications for how it might be healing or programming human sexuality. How a robot looks, talks, and acts all have the ability to affect us on very deep levels. If we can use a humanoid robot to orgasm, we will be much more inclined to take its suggestions, even if they're clearly paid advertisements. Sexual energy is the most powerful force that our bodies have access to. Technology will focus that energy and direct it back at us like a laser. We must be mindful of how we program robots, what form they take, and their potential impact on the user, so that we can create truly beneficial, pleasurable technologies.